This is Catherine Neal, and today we're going to be talking about categories of ethical dilemmas in business. The thought behind these 12 categories is that they can be used to help identify and simplify ethical issues that might occur in what appear to be complex business situations. This list of 12 categories was first developed at the Brigham Young University School of Business, and I find these 12 categories to be very helpful when trying to understand ethical issues in a business environment, in a complex business transaction. It helps to be able to identify them in their simplest terms, which helps us analyze and hopefully prevent and make good decisions when we are faced with ethical dilemmas. Okay, so the first category is one that's pretty straightforward: taking things that don't belong to you. And examples from a business setting include things like making personal copies on the company's copy machine, or taking office supplies home for personal use. A common way that employees may take things wrongfully from their employer is to inflate expenses on expense reports. So that is to ask for reimbursement for items or events or expenses that are personal expenses and expenses that the employer should not be responsible for. Another area of concern is using company assets and or technology for personal reasons, and conducting personal business on company time. So employees who are at work being paid, yet they're taking care of personal business. This raises some interesting questions and issues from the employer's point of view. Should they allow employees to conduct personal business while at work? Is that something that pays off in the long run? When we talk about creating work-life balance, are employees more satisfied? Are good employees retained longer? Can you recruit better employees if you allow an environment that encourages work-life balance? Or do employees take advantage of this type of environment and spend too much of their day doing things that are not related to the employer's work, and it reduces productivity significantly? This is an article, a blog, talking about employees being on their cell phones during the time that they're at work, which is a significant problem, and you can find lots of research and reading about the use of cell phones in the work environment. So take a look at this article. There's a link in the PowerPoint which is available to you, and give this some thought. Do you think it is the right thing to do for an employer to allow employees to use their cell phones while at work? What type of company policy should be in place about the use of cell phones while at work? And here is a link to some good templates if you are developing a policy about the use of cell phones. So you might give that a look. Some helpful information and ideas about how to prevent abuse and to prevent any problem with productivity of employees because of their cell phone use while at work. The next category, saying things that are not true, or in even more simple terms, lying. This can also include exaggerating, taking credit for someone else's work, which if you have not had that happen to you yet in your career, it will happen to you at some point. Failing to disclose information when you have a duty to disclose information. And another good example here is padding your resume. This is a really big problem and widespread problem, and a tough one, because we all use our resumes to reflect us in the best possible light. We want potential employers to view us and to find us attractive, to want to interview us, and to want to hire us. So we all want to make ourselves look good on our resumes. However, there is a line you cross where you go beyond just honestly reflecting your best qualities and skills and traits and lying about something on your resume. Here's a link to an article by the Society of Human Resources Management that you should go take a look at this article when you go through this PowerPoint presentation independently. And it talks about the most common things that individuals lie about on their resumes. Education and experience are the types of information most often falsified on a resume or job application. Career Builder found that the most common lies about the applicant's skill sets are lies about the applicant's skill sets, but their responsibilities, the things that they've done in prior employment, their employment dates, their job titles, and their academic degrees, something that people lie about far too often. So take a look at that article. It offers some good suggestions for trying to properly screen applicants in your workplace. Beyond the issue of lying from an ethical perspective, you can also run into legal problems for lying in the workplace. Fraud is a legal term for lying. Fraud is defined as any purposeful communication that deceives, manipulates, or conceals facts in order to create a false impression. It is a crime punishable by fines, significant fines, and or imprisonment, so it is a serious crime. Fraud costs business organizations billions of dollars a year. So it is a significant problem in the workplace. The next category, category number 3, giving or allowing false impressions. And this is similar to category 2, lying, only in this case, you could make the argument that you are not technically lying. However, you intended to mislead someone based on your careful word choices. And I've got an example of President Bill Clinton, who ended up being impeached for this type of ethical breach. He very carefully chose words while he was testifying under oath. He made the argument that he was not technically lying. However, it was his intent to deceive those who were listening to his testimony. The next category, buying influence or engaging in conflict of interest. A conflict of interest exists when an individual must choose whether to advance his or her own personal interests, those of the organization, or those of some other group. When you are employed, you owe certain duties to your employer. If you're performing your duties, if you're in the role of performing duties for your employer, you are to be looking out for your employer's best interests, not your own. A conflict of interest occurs when you insert yourself, your own personal interests, when you have a duty to be looking out for the interests of your employer. This is also sometimes called self-dealing. In fact, this can be something to be concerned with, even if there's the appearance of impropriety. You might not in reality be looking out for your own personal interests, but it could appear that you are, that you can't make an objective decision because of a prior relationship with someone you're dealing with, because of the potential that you're going to benefit personally from a transaction in which you're involved on behalf of your employer. So there are many, many conflicts of interests or appearance of conflicts of interest that appear in the work environment. Here's an example of a conflict of interest or undue influence that merited a significant investigation, and this happened at the University of Texas at Austin. And if you click on this link, you can find the full report that was drafted at the conclusion of a lengthy and thorough investigation. At UT Austin, questions were raised about whether admissions practices were fair, whether admissions policies were fairly administered, whether some people received favorable treatment over other applicants. And the favorable treatment was associated with letters from legislators, state legislators. They would write letters to the president of the university saying, I would really like my constituent John Doe to be admitted to the university. And maybe John Doe's SAT score or ACT score wasn't as high as it needed to be. Maybe his high school GPA wasn't as high as other applicants. But because a state legislator wrote to the president of the university, John Doe was admitted, which means someone else with perhaps better qualifications, a stronger application, was not admitted. And that's because the state legislator had the ability to fund things for the university or to refuse to fund things for the university. So the president wanted to please those state legislators who were writing the letters. And so the president would intervene in the admissions process and make sure certain students were admitted, not based on merit, but based on the influence of a state legislator. So that is a good example of conflict of interest and buying influence or undue influence in a process. So you might want to take a look at that report. It's interesting, and you can go out and Google UT Austin and their admissions practices, and you'll find all kinds of articles that summarize what happened in this scandal, admission scandal. The next category, Category 5, hiding or divulging information. In some cases, you are obligated to keep information to yourself, to keep it private. You do not have the right to share that information. For example, you work for your employer, you have access to certain information that your employer owns that they want to keep private. They're called trade secrets. There's intellectual property that you might have access to. If you leave that employer and go to one of their competitors, you are obligated to keep that information private. You are not allowed to share it with future employers. If you do, that's an ethical violation. And there are some other examples of the type of information, like customers' private information. You are not allowed to share that outside of the company. Another example of an ethical breach that would fall in this category is failing to disclose safety concerns. If you know something is going on in your company and you fail to disclose it, that is an ethical violation that would fit into this category. So hiding or divulging information. The next category, taking unfair advantage. There are a variety of different ways that you could take unfair advantage of individuals, of groups of individuals. Here are some examples. Using fine print in contracts. If you have, for example, a contract with a cell phone provider, I'm sure you most likely did not read the entire contract. And there are terms in there hidden in small print that you are unaware that you agreed to. Things that are not favorable for you as the customer, but that are entirely in the best interest of your provider. That would be taking unfair advantage of your customers, where you're not being forthcoming with important information, but hiding it, burying it in a contract that you know they're probably not going to read. So that would be an example of an ethical violation that would fit into this category. Another example, taking advantage of unsophisticated consumers. What if you're selling your products to consumers who you know don't have the ability or resources to educate themselves about the product that you're selling to them? Do you have an obligation to them, an ethical obligation to educate them, to not sell the product to them if they can't use it safely? If you don't, are you doing something unethical? So that fits into this category as well. Another example in this category is providing misleading information. And there's an example of an article talking about a settlement that Uber reached when they were challenged about using the slogan, we're the safest ride on the road, which some people found to be misleading. What evidence did they have that they are the safest ride on the road? So those are the types of ethical issues that would fall into this category. The next category, committing acts of personal decadence. Even though it may feel invasive, your employer has an interest in things that you do on your personal time. Sometimes those things can impact your performance. Sometimes they may not impact your performance, but your employer still has an interest in the things that you do in your personal time, in your personal life. There's a photo of former University of Cincinnati basketball coach Bob Huggins, who was arrested for driving under the influence and was subsequently fired by the university because of that. Why does the university care about what Bob Huggins does on his personal time? It did not impact how many games his team won, but it did have an impact on the university's reputation. Therefore, they have an interest in the things that Bob Huggins was doing on his personal time in his personal life. The next category, category 8, perpetrating interpersonal abuse. This is where someone in the workplace is abusive to those around them. They could be demeaning, unfair, hostile. Privacy issues might arise under this category. This could include physical, verbal, or mental abuse. Number 9, permitting organizational abuse. And this is talking not about an individual employed by an organization, but instead what the organization itself is doing that may be unethical. Issues that can arise under this category are often involve companies who operate internationally, things like child labor, providing a living wage to employees, the working conditions, whether you're running some type of sweatshop or have long working hours that are unhealthy and unfair for your employees. So those are the types of organizational abuse that would fit in this category. Number 10, very straightforward, violating rules. This is a category of ethical issues that you can find, whether you are violating rules Number 11, condoning unethical actions. This is where someone fails to report an ethical breach. You see something wrong, you see something bad is happening, and you don't report it. That in and of itself is an ethical problem. And finally, number 12, which is kind of a catch-all for really difficult ethical situations. This is where there is no clear right or wrong answer, and you are in a definite gray area where you can't see one clear right path to take. And that's the type of ethical problem that would fall into this 12th category. And that's it. Those are the 12 categories of ethical dilemmas developed by the Brigham Young University School of Business.